This was the first band that I ever absolutely loved as a kid. Couldn't be happier, John. So tell me why you've chosen Benny Andersson and Bjorn as your strategists.
Yes, I see Bjorn and Benny just being very clever at reinventing themselves, both individually and collectively, as ABBA, reinventing themselves in terms of their world of music in response to, they started off in folk and folk jazz and folk skiffle and all sorts of variations on music. And so they evolved as musicians. They evolved in response to changing markets and what people wanted to listen to and buy. And I think they just became, learning from history, learning from events, just supremely good at understanding what people wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
And they gave people what they wanted to listen to across the world, in Europe, European markets first, then Australia, South Africa, Japan, the US eventually to some extent. But that takes some strategist thinking to understand their world of music and their markets well enough to be able to deliver. As ABBA, they had their decade, didn't they? When was that? 76 to... You know the numbers better than me, but
74 was
wasn't it? Yes.
Song Contest, and sort of around about 83 they fizzled out. But as you say, it was a real decade of hit after hit after hit. But interestingly, at no time since, do you listen to the radio and think that sounds so old? Because they chose the pop genre to be where they would make their fortunes, if you like. And pop is still fashionable today, their stuff still sounds relevant, which is why they've pretty much sold out all of this year's gigs, which are virtual, in London. But the thing about them, as you say, was that pure pragmatism of, well, we loved the folk music. I mean, some people assume that ABBA came from nowhere, but all four of them were in bands and were successful. In fact, Bjorn and Benny were both in bands that were in their own rights #1 in Sweden. So they knew how to make popular music for Sweden, but they also knew that wasn't going to translate. And so they started to think about, okay, so how can we play on a bigger stage? And that's where the pop concept came from. And they, what's still fascinating, though, you listen to a lot of their records and you can hear all the influences of the folk music and the skiffle and the core Swedish themes, if you like, in their music. But that doesn't matter. They've transformed into a pop artist by the time that you and I are considering them.
Yes, yeah. It's nice to know that you're a fellow fan. You clearly are.
Yeah. Well, they were just. I don't recall them being on the Eurovision Song Contest. I was 6. He says, giving away his age, but I recall the record being on the radio a lot. So Waterloo for me was the record on the radio a lot that I heard. But then it was a little bit later again before I actually bought my first record, my 7-inch single, which was Take a Chance on Me by ABBA. And that was really where I started to, get into them and really enjoy their music. I wasn't trendy like in their music though as a youngster, because obviously in the UK everything was to do with punk. And they emerged in that glam rock phase where I was liking people like Gary Glitter and Slade and those sorts of people and T-Rex. But by the time I liked that, but I wasn't very trendy liking them. But I just felt like I'm enjoying the music, so why not? But they weren't trendy themselves in so many markets. So many critics absolutely hated them. Yes. But they had their strategist hat on, which said, you don't have to all like us. We just know that there's a big enough audience out there.
Yes, yeah. It is interesting, isn't it? That sense of them being too commercial, too manufactured. And that's not what music is about. But, huge success. And thankfully, people like you and I can say we like them without feeling too coy about it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. There are quite a few tracks that are going through my mind that we could have chosen, and we'll share the one we have chosen in a moment. But another one that I felt demonstrated their pragmatism was The Winner Takes It All.
Yes.
Which, they actually wrote during the period that Bjorn and Agnetha were separating.
Yeah.
And they've said since, that the words in the song don't relate to them because there were no winners, because their children were involved. But to be able to write that type of song and continue to record together, even though both partnerships had failed, they all four still got in the studio and said, well, this is what we have to do. It's a very pragmatic decision to continue. We all know of the bands that blew up because of personality problems, and there was no pragmatism involved. They just dissolved. Yeah. Whereas ABBA kept going for a good couple of years after the separation, based on the fact that they had a job to do.
And their fans wanted to hear that story, however shaped, through their music.
Definitely. But we haven't gone for that one. We've gone...
No, and I have gone for Waterloo. I mean, I think that sticks in many people's minds. I've gone for it because I think it also... It's a point of transition for them. It also reflects, I think, what they learned from their history. It wasn't their first attempt at representing Sweden. So if I tie it into my Churchill quote, the suggestion with Waterloo is they had learned from what had gone before. They had reshaped themselves, and there's a pragmatism in that, isn't there? That they want to evolve as people, as musicians, as a band. So yes, the song is Waterloo.
Yeah, and you're so right about the fact that they'd learned from history, because literally the year before they'd come third in the Swedish competition with Ring Ring, but they had almost like in business terms, we've called them war rooms, haven't we? Where people map out everything that's happening. How do we make it all work? Their campaign for 74 started in 73. They knew it was going to be in England, the competition. They knew that it had to be really poppy, it had to be understandable, it had to be relatable. So by picking up on Waterloo, the Battle of Waterloo, 1815 and all that sort of stuff, and singing in English and coming out in glam rock costumes, it was unbelievably orchestrated in terms of the planning was meticulous.
Indeed, in that strategist sense, it was very well thought through.
Yeah, definitely.